Hi guys, back in the workshop today, and what I thought I'd do today is just run through some of the smaller tools which will make fabrication projects much easier to do. And we'll try and run through these fairly quick. First things first, anyway, you need your safety goggles or glasses and earmuffs if you're going cutting or making noise or whatever. The next stage then is sort of the low-tech side of it, which would be a sheet of paper and a pen. Do a rough sketch of whatever project you're doing. Or organize your dimensions or decide on your dimensions. Underneath that then put a list of materials and then what I'd call a cut list, so that plan your cuts so that you're not wasting material by cutting badly. Below that then I'd also include a list of tooling that you'll need. There's nothing worse than having all your materials prepped and your plan ready to go, and then you realise that number one, you've no grinding discs or a cutting disc, or you're missing a 1/4 inch or a 6mm drill bit or whatever it is. So list out the tooling that you're going to use as well, especially the consumable sides of it. Okay. Now, I would say as well, what's of great use inside in the workshop is a calculator. Get a cheap one whenever you can, and dedicate it then to the workshop. You can probably use your phone, or there's an app on pretty much every phone for a calculator, but you could be wearing gloves, your hands be oily, greasy, etc, etc. So there's nothing wrong with spending €6 or €8 or $8 to $10 on a cheap calculator and just dedicating it to the workshop. It's always there then when you need it. Now that's your safety gear organised, your plan done. After that then, the first thing you're going to do is start measuring materials. Fabrication is roughly cutting materials down to size and then assembling in the order that you want. The most common piece of kit that you're going to use is a normal tape measure. Get one with inches and metric on it. Keep the flexibility there. What I would say as well is that you will find that with all tape measures, or all the good ones anyway, the little tab at the end moves in and out. It's supposed to do that, and the logic being that if you measure inside, an inside dimension, that the tab goes in, and then if you measure out, the tab should go out, and the movement on that tab equals the width of the tab itself, and that's why that's there. Generally speaking, a 5 meter or 16-foot one will sort of get you pretty much where you want to go. After that then, I suppose my next recommendation would be calipers, digital calipers. I did a video specifically on these, extolling their benefits, and I don't think there's a day goes by without using these calipers to measure something. This one, pretty cheap one. I think it cost me about €45, which would be about $50. I bought it specifically because it had a big screen and the eyesight is not as good as it used to be, so the screen was easier to read. It came with both metric and imperial measurements, and there's also a feature on this where it gives fractional imperial measurements, which is very handy. So if we measure something, and we'll stick it to millimeters first. Okay, we'll zero that. Okay, and if we measure, we'll call it 6.3-ish there, about 6.37 millimeters. If we convert that over to inches, it gives us 0.2505. But then what you'll get then in the fractional reading is a 1/4 inch, which is very handy just to know. A lot of the time when you're measuring material, the nominal value will be a 1/4 inch, but it'll measure slightly under that, and you won't know that you're dealing with 1/4 inch material, but this sort of helps sort that out. The calipers are particularly useful for measuring round stuff. Very difficult to measure anything round with a tape measure, whatever, but all you need to do is clamp that there. I was saying that's coming in at 24.77, so it's roughly about an inch in diameter. And it's also very good for measuring sort of very thin materials. Let's say, if you were trying to measure this fella here, which is a drill gauge, try and measure that with a tape measure. No chance. That's coming in at 0.85 mil. And we'll convert that into inches, which is 1/32 of an inch. So you can see the benefits of one of these straight away. When it comes then to measuring sheets or stuff like that, there's two tools which are particularly advantageous. Number one is a long ruler. This can also be used as a straight edge. This is again inch and metric, useful. And what I did at some point anyway was buy a length of aluminium, cut it down into sort of an 8 foot and a 4 foot section, and that sort of spans most widths that I need to run a straight edge. So after you measure a number of times, stick your straight edge on it and draw a line. When it comes then, and we'll actually use our piece of aluminium as a prop here. If we wanted to measure a length of this, what we use then is a square, and what I'd suggest is make sure that the square has a big back end on it, so that it'll sit flush with the side of the material, and then you can run it up or down and measure in against that. They're also available in 45 degrees, and there's also other ones as well with adjustable angles on them, or adjustable variation on them, so you can measure any angle that you want. The 45 degree one is handy though. Now, when it comes to squares, it's one of those things where you never really have enough of. This fella here is a Swanson Tool Company out of Illinois, and this is a speed square, and this is a metric speed square. And what you'll find with one of these is there's indentations at each centimetre mark. So if you want to run up a sheet of material and you want 5 centimetres all up that sheet of material, you can stick your pencil or marking tool in there, run up the material with the pencil inside in the 5 centimetre mark. They're available on Amazon anyway. This is a Johnson one, again made in the USA, and this just happens to be an Imperial one where you have a marker every inch and every quarter along the way as well. One tool that I found particularly useful is this marking gauge, and you'll see these used a lot in carpentry. This is a sort of a heavier duty one, which is sort of, I'd say, generally designed for steel, and you can measure, let's say, when it's down to here, and there's actually, I'll zoom it in now, but there's a scale on top of the measurement there as well. So we'll say that's set at 0 at the moment there. So if we run that scale up to, call it 5, and your eyesight would want to be fairly good for this, that would give us 5 centimetres then here. So again, you could run up the edge of a sheet and mark it out as you're going along. Again, all of these tools, they just make life easier rather than anything else. Now, what I would say as well is don't get too upset if you don't have any of these. Start out with a pencil and a ruler and you'll do fine. But as birthdays and Christmas come by, or you see these things start to cheap inside in the shop, pick them up and add them to your list. They're very handy for that. One small thing as well. This is a center finder for round stock, and the way this works is if you need to drill a hole in round stock, is you stick it on like that, draw a line down the middle there, and then turn it with, say, whatever, 90 degrees. Draw another line down the middle there, and where those two lines intersect, then you'll have the center of your round stock if you need to drill a hole in it. Again, sort of a low tech, low cost piece of equipment. Now, we're sort of, that's the measurement side of it. When it comes to marking the material, then you're obviously going to start off with the cheapest pencil or Sharpie marker. What you'll find with those is that the Sharpie markers, there's quite a wide nib on the marker, and it doesn't give you that precise a cut, especially if you're trying to drill round holes, or drill a precise hole. What I find useful there is a Scribe, and what these are is just a bit of steel or something like that, mild steel, with a tungsten sharpened tip on them for scribing into metals. They're hard and they will leave a groove. Now, difficult to see that line if you're going cutting then with an angle grinder or whatever. So I'd augment the line that you leave with this with a pencil mark as well, or some other more visible mark. So that's marking. Now, one thing that I'll just cover is, I saw this on a video myself somewhere. This is a Markall Silver Streak, and there's it's a sort of an indexable pencil. It pops in and out, and whatever that material is, it's some type of wax or crayon or something like that, but it's good and visible underneath an arc or underneath an angle grinder, because obviously there's a lot of sparks and light flying with an angle grinder, but it's actually very visible and it's quite precise as well. So if you mark out with a Scribe first and then follow that with this, your chances of success then in getting a cut where you want it or a hole drill where you want it will be all the better for it. When it comes to making round things then, these are just a sort of a a little set of compass or whatever. Again, there's tungsten carbide tips on these, so you can stick it in, spin it around and make a mark with that. And one thing that I found to be particularly handy is a set of drill gauges that I had. They're both metric and imperial there. These are great for marking holes. Let's say if I want an 8mm hole, find my 8mm hole here and use that as the circle to draw the 8mm hole, and then center punch the center of it. When it comes to center punches then, if you're drilling steel or any metal, what you'll find is that when you start off with the drill, it's inclined to skate or slide, and that's where these fellows come in. And again, these are hardened or tungsten carbide hardened tips on a sort of a metal shank. You stick them in. This is a manual one where you stick it in where you want to, give it a good thump of a hammer, and it leaves a little dimple. This one then is an automatic one where you just press down the back and it pops. I'll just show you that now. And it pops, and you can see a little dimple in the steel there. I hope you can anyway, underneath the shine of the light. So that's roughly number one, planning our project, doing a cut list of materials, list of consumables. Using your equipment then, we'll say rulers, straight edges, marking gauges, etc., to mark out your equipment, and then using scribes, etc., to decide where you want to drill or where you want to cut. Now, we've run through measurement and marking out tools and stuff like that, and I just have another few bits and pieces here that might be useful to somebody if they're making things or start to fabricate. One thing that I did forget before in the last section was that when you're dealing with square tubing, you'll find that the corners are rolled, and that's one of the reasons that the square with the big backside on it is so handy, is that it'll level up against a side that's square rather than getting caught in that corner or turn bit. So keep an eye on that. Just as an aside as well, this is sort of a combined sliding square. You'll see these used a lot by carpenters, and what they are is a square that moves up and down. Obviously they come in metric, imperial, and probably both. It'll give you 90 degree that way, it'll give you a 45 degree piece that way. There's a little spirit level inside in the handle, and there's also, in most of them, I've been told, and I only found this out through seeing it on a YouTube video myself, is that a lot of them have a little scribe attached into them somewhere. So if you see a little knurl on a little piece of steel or plastic sitting inside one of these, keep your eye out. That's handy now for marking a bit of steel. It is hardened and sharpened, so don't try not to stab yourself with it. So they're two bits that I forgot. Moving on then, and some of the tools I find handy. Number one is when it comes to putting work together ready for welding, are these welding magnets. You can buy these switched or unswitched, and the way it works, right, is an unswitched one. I don't know how the magic works in it, but it has no magnetic power until you turn the switch on. So we'll say if we stick that up there and switch on our magnet, what you'll find then is that that's a good solid hold on that. Now you could probably knock it around with a hammer, or even shuffle it around if you had to for final placement, but it gives a good degree of adhesion to it. So they're particularly handy, and what they call it, this one is made by Strong Hand Tools. I know that there's a good number of manufacturers of those switchable magnets. I would emphasize as well, this is not a pitch for any particular brand. I'm just letting you know what's out there. Next thing then, which is of particular use, is clamps that when you're cutting material or trying to weld or stuff like that, you have two types. This hand clamp came from a German supermarket. I think they were $4.99 each, so they were fair cheap. And the way that works is sort of a little ratchety mechanism, and it clamps in, and it provides a good degree of clamping force, especially if you're holding something with one hand and you've only one hand then to try and operate a clamp. That these trigger types are very handy, and there's a good bit of clamping power in that, you know. So that would certainly pinch up the work, that you could get a stronger clamp on it then. Now when it comes to stronger clamps, there's heaps of heaps of different designs, sizes, layout, shapes, etc, etc. The ones I find that I get the most use out of are these sort of standardized welding clamps. This one made by Vice Grips themselves, yeah, Irwin Vice Grip. And these come in sort of two styles. Number one is sort of just a small little face on this, and then the other ones then are sort of more designed for sheet metal, whereby you've sort of a wider clamping surface. Well worth having a few of these, and what I'd say is that over time build up a collection of clamps, measuring material, marking material, and make yourself a list so that if somebody ever asks you what you want for your birthday or Christmas, you have a good answer to give to them, rather than getting those pair of socks that you didn't particularly want. Now, one last thing that I came across, again, YouTube video myself, is I think they're just generically called 1, 2, 3 blocks. And where they came from originally was a piece of metal, 1 inch by 2 inch by 3 inches. And if we measure this now, this gives us 1 inch by 2 inch by 3 inch. So that's those two there. They're Imperial, and these ones then are, we'll call it a metric version of that, which I think are 20, 40, 80s. So we'll just test that now. So 19.99, yeah, 20 by 39.97, 40 by 80.04, yeah. So you can pick these up, you can make them yourself, or get someone to make them for you, even better, who has a milling machine or something, who can put a flat face on them. Very handy if you're doing a lot of sort of repetitive work where you either need 20, 40 or 80 mil of a measurement, a standardized measurement, or 1, 2 or 3 inches. So keep your eye out for these. You might come across them cheap somewhere. I do know that they're sort of good brands and bad brands. The bad brands here, they can only be so bad at the end of the day, so well worth looking at. So anyway, that's roughly it as regards sort of the smaller tools when it comes to fabrication or marking stuff out and putting stuff together. Again, I'd emphasize that this is not a pitch for any particular brand of tool or anything like that. It's just bits and pieces I've collected over the years, which do make life easier in the workshop when you're putting stuff together. So if you have any questions, stick them in the comments down below, and we'll talk to you again.